Welcome to this first session of the second edition of the ACMHangouts hosted by Arts Council Malta. During these sessions, we shall be inviting professionals, experts, creative practitioners to join our discussion focusing on topics related to culture and creativity, and more specifically to the strategy work which Arts Council Malta is currently focusing on. The sessions will be all streamed on the Arts Council Facebook page and will be then available on the same page. The sessions are also going to be available on timesofmalta.com. Today, we shall be focusing on the very important subject of creativity and well-being. And our panel is made up of Ms. Marianne Kauki, Director Funding and Strategy at Arts Council Malta, Ms. Emma Hogg, psychotherapist and founder of A Life I Choose, and Dr. Mari Briguglio, resident academic at the University of Malta, Department of Economics, lecturing in environmental economics, behavioral economics, and social marketing. So we have a number of topics to discuss, a number of points to focus on, so I immediately pass on the floor to Marianne for an introduction about the subject. Marianne?
Okay, so thank you for this lovely introduction. It's good to be back with our ACM Hangouts. Basically, I'm just going to start with the statement, embracing culture for the well-being of all. We're looking into this being the vision for Malta's national culture policy, which is about to be launched sooner than we know, basically. Following that, Arts Council Malta is currently also evaluating and consulting its new strategy for 21 to 25, which I have to say, well-being is a priority. Well-being in the arts, creativity, society at large, communities. So yes, I believe we have lots to discuss. We're not going to invent the wheel. This is something that's been happening abroad and, in different countries. Certain things are tried and tested. We need to look at this in the local context. Lots to do, lots of people to and entities to engage. Why do I say this? Because it goes across the board when it comes to education, health, social security, economy in general. So yes, when we're talking of creativity and we're talking of arts and well-being, nowadays they're totally in sync. When I started my career in the sector, which I would say it's more than 20 years now, you wouldn't have imagined to link the two together, especially on the island. But I think a need has come up. Arts Council has carried various different research about the matter. Also, thanks to our funding programs, which we currently offer in this regard when it comes to funding programs like Premutal President, which is a funding program. It is a funding scheme, and it addresses very much, and we have loads of projects that address on a short-term basis, regrettably, that address well-being in the arts.
So I think you saw a certain benefits of linking the two and of working more on this topic, I presume.
Yes, the outcomes, yes, very impactful in the sense, very beneficial to different categories, different age groups, whether it's children, whether it's elderly, general communities, hard-to-reach groups, whereby arts was utilized therapeutically, and also as the cultural scene, the culture, I mean, one can't not mention the circumstances we are currently living, new realities, and we also found that culture and arts played an important role to the general well-being, not only in a therapeutic, a very specialized therapeutic route, but also in general. Yes. Why? We kept referring to arts during close downs, lockdowns, or
Yes.
partial close downs, or, staying home. Yes, I think arts do play an important role in our lives, and without knowing it, it's part of our well-being.
Exactly. And I actually would like to start with the word well-being, and I'd like to ask Emma, when we refer to well-being, what do we mean by that? What are the conditions for well-being?
Okay, so the way that I understand well-being is quality of life, right? So kind of how well do you feel on a general basis? And you can look at this sort of, I like to use this diagram, I'm not sure what it's called, like a picture, basically a circle. And you can think of it like a pizza, okay? And each slice represents a different area of your life. So one slice is your physical body, another slice is your emotions, then you have your relationships, you have your career, your finances, your spirituality. And something that I like to do with many of my clients is ask them, okay, for each slice, where would you rate your life at this point in time on a scale of 0 to 10? 0, it can't get any worse. 10, it couldn't get any better. And then they'll rate it, So some people will end up with their physical body being an 8, but then their finances being a 2. Other people have their finances at a 10 and their emotions and meaning at a 3, And it's called the wheel of life because you think of it as a wheel, right? So if one's at a 3 and one's at a 10, that's going to be a really bumpy ride. And in order to experience a life that is, exciting and growthful and fulfilling, all of these areas need to be boosted consistently, and even when you're really rocking and rolling at one, it still needs love and attention and care. So I think of well-being in a very sort of holistic manner where it's not the absence of illness, it's, how well do you feel? How often do you experience positive emotions in comparison to negative emotions? How, not that I think you should never experience negative emotions, because
it's part of it as
they're
well.
vital.
It's part of life.
They're
right?
vital, and they tell us how to respond to our environment with some processing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I see it all very sort of holistically. Did I answer your question?
Yes, okay. Very well.
Okay.
Mari, I would like to actually ask this same question to you now. You have studied well-being, explored the subject of well-being. What's your take? How do you define well-being? And how do you measure well-being? Because I know that's also another area where you have worked on and explored.
Okay, thank you for having me here and for asking this question. So there are more than one way of defining first and then measuring well-being. For example, one way to split the methods is to talk of the objective measurements of well-being and the more subjective measurements. The objective measurements would seek to measure those conditions which we were just talking about, which are generally conducive to well-being. Good health, good income, social activities, engagement in nature, the arts, spirituality, all these things which we know, objectively speaking, generally tend to create the good life, right? A good life. And then there are the more subjective ways of measuring well-being, and that is by asking people themselves, how do you feel? And we tend to, there are different ways of asking this. So you can have scales which look at negative and positive emotions. You can have a single question or different single questions. One method which is quite common also because it is expedient, of course that comes with its own flaws, is to ask what is called the life satisfaction or happiness Cantrell ladder question, where you basically ask people on a scale from 0 to 10, how happy do you feel right now? That tries to get a sense of the sort of more affective well-being. Or you could ask, on a scale from 0 to 10, how satisfied are you with your life right now? And that's a more sort of cognitive approach to well-being. It involves the person kind of going through all those objective areas and then summing up for themselves from 0 to 10 where they are on the life satisfaction scale. Now, these are all flawed. Some measures take a long time to extract from people, and they're, laborious also for the participant in the research, but maybe they get closer to measuring, and some are fast, but maybe not so precise. And that's what research is about, after all. It's about making these trade-offs to try and get at the truth somehow as best you can with the constraints.
Exactly, because I was actually thinking that this is quite subjective as well, because obviously in terms of life satisfaction, I could rate it in one way or consider it in one way, and you could consider it on in a totally different manner. So how do you try to make sense of that then?
Yes, that is one of the shortcomings of research, especially if it's conducted in different countries, because different cultures might have different ways of answering, how do you feel right now? For example, it might not be culturally acceptable to say, I'm really well. It might be more culturally acceptable to say, I'm not bad, right? Mush hazin, that's what we say in Malta too. However, when you're doing a survey, in a given time period, you repeat that question in other time periods, you can have some degree of comparison. And in fact, the statistic on life satisfaction tends to be quite consistently a histogram with many people responding 7 or 8, far fewer responding 6 or 9, and then it kind of tapers, with a skew towards the upper end, and it's kind of consistent in that way. I mean, one way to answer this question really is, who better to talk about how well they feel than the individual that you're asking, right?
Exactly.
So really the best way to measure well-being is a combination of these objective methods, and then you listen also to the individual in this quantitative but subjective manner, and then you might want to do a deeper dive of more qualitative work to get there. And, no researcher worth his or her salt will argue that their method is the best, because really research is a combination of understanding these different methods to get there.
Okay, Maria, and I'd like actually to refer to your latest paper about the subject, where you and obviously in your paper, you stated that there is a growing body of evidence that cultural engagement can positively affect well-being, diversely defined. And that takes us back to what Marianne was saying in the introduction. So is there a relationship between culture and well-being?
So it would seem to be that there is certainly a correlation. So people who are happy engage in the arts makes people happy. So there's some kind of correlation in one way or the other. It's much harder to find evidence of a causal relationship. That is, that when you get a dose of the arts, you improve your well-being. But there is evidence of that too. And what's perhaps interesting is to understand why. What is the causal mechanism? So what is it that causes people? Is there a theoretical insight that gives us a clue as to why engagement in cultural activities might make people feel better? And the answer is yes, there's plenty. There's the acquisition of skills, the ability, the capacity to participate in what is a cultural communion of sorts. There is the social aspect, there is the growth, there's the release of emotions, there is the development of self-concept, there's the volunteering at times, there's being with others. So, there's a lot of reason to suspect that participation in the arts might make people feel happier or give them more life satisfaction. Okay. And we do find that that is in fact true. We find that in Malta, for example, people who engage both passively as audience and actively, they actually do something, tend to demonstrate higher levels of well-being, even though there are other aspects on that wheel, which was mentioned, which are suppressing their well-being. The fact that they participate helps to give them a higher score, let's say, all things said and done.
Exactly.
Interestingly,
I actually wanted to ask, but what kind of participation? Because when you, in the paper, there are references to different kinds of participation. And also I would like to refer to another study which you conducted earlier about young people and Festi and their participation in the Festa, and how that study seemed to suggest that again there's a relationship between that in terms of increasing well-being. So what kind of participation are we referring to here?
well, there's one debate in these types of papers and these types of studies as to whether just putting your bottom on a seat and watching a show is going to sort of enhance your well-being. And it does seem to indicate that participative engagement that is actually doing something is more likely to be associated with higher levels of well-being. We find that too in our studies. We do find that specifically participation in the traditional activities are the ones which have the highest sense of association with higher life satisfaction or higher levels of happiness. This is perhaps not surprising. I don't want to be guilty of confirmation bias here, but we do know that Festi, Carnival, and so forth are the ones that attract the large numbers. That's where we're likely to observe a signal between the, in statistical terms, that's what happens. If you've got a large influx in one of the domains, and a large influx in the other, you're likely to find this association.
So we're talking mostly about the community engagement here and the benefits in terms of community engagement, I believe.
To keep it simple, what we're saying is there's large numbers of Maltese people who participate in traditional events. These traditional events have a lot going for them in terms of community spirit, having a goal, having this sort of sense of both spiritual and cultural come together. And it is therefore not wholly surprising that that participation in these events also translates in a higher sense of well-being for the people who are involved.
Thanks, Maria. I would like to link this with actually another speaker we have today on Zoom, Dr. Noel Camilleri. Hi, Dr. Noel. Dr. Noel is the president of the Aqda Kazini Tal-Banda. Dr. Camilleri, I would like to ask you in terms of what is your experience in relation to what Marie was just saying, that there are clear signs that Festi, in this case, do actually contribute to the well-being of people actively engaging in Festi. I think, just 1 second, please. I think we cannot hear you here. Can you please? Yes, perfect.
Okay. I can't agree more with what Maria just said, because through the participation, the element of participation of volunteers in the festas gives a person a greater satisfaction and also an element of happiness. This translates to the amount of people that take part and assist in organizing the festas. As everyone knows, festas are not not something very lightly to be organized, and there is a lot of administrative work that has to be done. Yet, the satisfaction that goes with the successful organization of a festa is for everyone there to see. When you see the hundreds of youths that give a helping hand in order to honor the patron saints of that town or village. So I think it is an essential ingredient in our cultural gene, really. What I have also, but what my doubt is that, unfortunately, the hundreds of people, of youths who take part in the organization then tend to forget this person's satisfaction, in the sense that we need to nurture this culture, the sense of belonging, in order for this well-being to continue along during the whole of the year, and not simply during this period, particular period. The fact that the summer festas were not organized has left an impact on youth, I think. And from what we have gathered as an association, we need to, as a council, also as a council, we need to see how to give again, inject again this feeling of well-being in order to overcome these exceptional circumstances of the pandemic, which are leaving some, I would say not some, leaving a lot of effect on participation.
Exactly, because once this community element has been challenged so much during these past months, obviously there is, so what Marie was commenting on was completely, entirely challenged and changed during these past months. So that didn't happen. So if we said that community and well-being go together, so that means that well-being was reduced, was also challenged on that level.
It was reduced, and what we think is happening is, if this pandemic prolongs itself even into 2021, and the likelihood seems that is the trend, then there's going to be continued fizzling out of this well-being, feel-good factor of youth participating in these, let's say, the fest especially. So we need also to try to address this through initiatives in order for youth to be given back a sense of satisfaction, of feeling good, in order to do something innovative related to culture.
Exactly. So you're suggesting that at this point we should kind of keep the initiatives going, keep the participation there in some way or another, which is possible, in order to retain the sense of well-being, no?
Exactly.
And
because we are feeling this effect, and I'm sure not just the band clubs, but all cultural entities are feeling this effect. And it is having, I would say, and not being pessimistic, but I would say a bit of a devastating effect it is leaving. Even the musicians, from the musicians' side, the fact that musicians are not playing, are not exercising their profession, is also leaving an effect.
Okay, thank you.
Because there's this personal satisfaction when you play. The fact that they're not playing anything is also leaving this effect, which I hope doesn't have long-lasting ripple effects, which will hurt this very important aspect of our cultural heritage.
Thank you, Dr. Camilleri, for joining us today. Thank you very much. So, Emma, when the community aspect is so challenged and forced to change its ways, what happens there in terms of well-being and in terms of how it rates among the society and people?
I think everyone has been impacted, on an individual level. I think that, I haven't come across anybody who hasn't sort of experienced more anxiety or, been in touch with this sense of uncertainty. Obviously, we all have a responsibility towards resilience.
Exactly.
And teaching ourselves how to be resilient, and a lot of us don't know how to be resilient either. That hasn't been modeled to us, or we just haven't had teachers for it. So, finding teachers who can model resilience and teach it to us. And you speak about creativity and well-being, and I found, for example, lockdown was an amazingly, I was very busy throughout lockdown, but I had a lot of people sort of all of a sudden having time and having space. And I think in a way, sometimes being bored is a real gift. I like to fill my time. Like, I like to kind of, I have 5 minutes. Like, how can I fill it, But it's in those moments of boredom when something actually strikes, typically. So I think that, kind of it's been, with every down, there's the opposite side as well. Like, we're such complex human beings, and we are such a resilient species, both physically and emotionally, and our creativity is our integration, right? That is what creativity is.
Exactly.
It's our ability to take information from the outside world, sensory information, intellectual information, take it in, filter it through our belief structures and our value systems, and then come out with something. And not only are you filtering it through, but they're also challenging your belief structures and your value system. So not only do you come out with something new or different or slightly different or whatever, but you've also grown and changed through the process.
Exactly. And going back to the community aspect, I think many comments which were quite were being made and presented even to Arts Council, I believe, where that the sense of community helped in terms of overcoming the difficulties and the different challenges which we had. I don't know if you have any comments from even what happened recently.
Yes, I have to say certain things existed. Just COVID happened to highlight certain aspects. And fast forward certain situations. So as Arts Council, pre-COVID circumstances, we were already tackling cultural rights. Cultural rights link very much with, in fact, what Dr. Camilleri Noel was explaining a while ago. And also you mentioned when it comes to traditional festas and events, and culture in general, happenings, activities, etc. Performances, shows, whatever, mention it. The implementation of cultural rights is yet to be fully integrated within this environment. Okay, it's a fancy word, maybe, but we structure ourselves on the A's. What does that mean? Accessibility. So, yes, being accessible and not excluding, and being accessible as in being, for example, online. Are we accessible enough? Being just physical, are we accessible enough? So the element of accessibility is going to fulfill one of the cultural rights. Yeah. Adaptability, where we need to adapt and diversify certain situations. We need to, we can't stick to our, business models, or we can't stick to the usual group. We need to adapt. Adopt as well, adopt appropriateness. Appropriateness, for example, expression word, are we being suitable? Are we offending? Are we being inclusive with our statements? So yes, basically looking into cultural rights is a solid way of maybe implementing well-being within our communities.
So that is what led you kind of to reflect a little bit more on the subject maybe and say, yes, this is the right time to start including that in the policy, in the strategy.
Exactly. In fact, in the past months, lots of works took place in the sector where lots of consultation took place when it comes to cultural rights, well-being. For example, we had focus groups with elderly, and they would tell you, okay, it would be lovely to make certain activities available to the elderly. We find it very difficult late at night to travel, for example. I'm mentioning basics here. But yes, for example, children are very much engaged it's part of their well-being to be engaged in culture. So we, as Arts Council, met different focal groups, age groups, consulted even hard-to-reach groups. It's part of their well-being.
Yep.
And in fact, we could also see projects that have been funded and supported by Arts Council in this regard. When it comes to foundations or organizations, non-profit organizations, support was given because we believe the arts, the creativity element, would lead, this is a bit more specialized here, would lead to their well-being. I'm not talking now about the general well-being of the community, although that's... so cultural rights is a means, it's a tool to actually implement well-being and creativity, get them implemented in society at large.
Thank you, Marianne. This is a brilliant introduction to our next guest, who is Professor Stephen Clift, who is the director of a specialized research unit in the Faculty of Health and Wellbeing. And he worked quite extensively on investigating the active participation in creative arts activities for well-being and health. Professor Clift, we had the opportunity to speak about the subject just yesterday, and you told me that you spent quite a lot of time and a significant time in your career advocating for arts and health and the relationship between that. Why is that?
Yes, thank you very much. It's delightful to be able to join this discussion today, and I've found the contributions so far very interesting and pertinent. I've worked in the field of arts and health in the UK for over 20 years now, and have had a particular interest in the value of group singing for well-being, especially for older people and people who are facing challenges of long-term conditions. So my concern certainly has been about the value of this kind of activity for people's well-being in a general sense, in the way that has been described so far, but also very specifically in relation to people's physical health. Is there evidence that participation in creative arts activities, such as singing, is there evidence that that really makes a difference to people's physical well-being as well as their psychological and social well-being? The psychological and social dimensions of an activity like coming together to sing are very, very clear. It's very palpable. You only need to participate in this kind of activity to experience it for yourself and to see it among other people. And what's been particularly striking for me is the...
Yeah, I think that unfortunately we have a technical problem there. Okay. So until we establish the connection again, and I refer the same question to Emma actually. So in what ways do you think that
they're prepared
okay, sorry.
to getting a message that the connection is unstable?
Sorry,
I don't know whether you
Professor
can hear
Clift,
me.
we just missed this very last part of your presentation.
I think that I was just explaining that sometimes people can be reluctant to take up an artistic and creative activity like singing with other people if they've had little experience of it. But with a little bit of encouragement, we've always found that people are willing to have a go and to try it, and very quickly come to be engaged and to enjoy it and to feel that they really are benefiting from it psychologically and socially. The kinds of points that Marie made earlier about people coming together and working together and being constructive and creative together, I've seen a great deal of evidence of that over many, many years. But the key question from a health point of view is, does it really make any difference to the health condition that people are living with? Mm-hmm. And after all, in older age, people may be affected by a wide variety of long-term chronic conditions, which generally deteriorate over time. What I feel is that activities, creative activities, arts activities, singing is one of them, but there are many others. It could be dance, it could be visual arts, it could be creative writing, it could be theatre and drama work. All of these activities can help people to manage their condition rather better. And there's such an interaction between our mental well-being on the one hand and our physical well-being on the other. And it's very clear that if people are affected by challenges to their mental well-being, it impacts also on their physical well-being. So to help to encourage people to come together, to do something positive, to have a lot of fun together. Our groups are often punctuated by laughter. It's undoubtedly a very beneficial thing for people to do.
So Professor Clift, in terms of the projects which you actually led and which were focusing on singing, what did you observe in terms of their effects on physical well-being? Because this is very interesting. I think we often speak about the mental well-being and this coming together, but you notice that there's actually an effect on them improving their condition.
Well, I'd like to come back to the point that Marie made about subjective assessments and objective measurements. And in the case of people with a condition like chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, we have certainly found that people report that they feel better able to manage their condition. Breathlessness is a recurrent problem that people experience with COPD, and there are various kinds of medications that people can use to help them by using inhalers, for example. I've experienced several times people participating in singing who say, I don't need to use my inhaler so much. Mm-hmm. That I've developed skills and strategies for coping with breathlessness, to breathe in a different way, to manage that better, and that's helped me make less use of medication. Now that's a very important observation, actually. We've also had people who will say that, I've been singing for several months, and we're going into the winter period. In previous years, I've had complications with my condition. I've needed to go into hospital. I've not needed to do that. Now, on the other hand, when people's lung capacities are measured, when their exercise capacity is measured, we have not really found significant positive change. What we have found sometimes is that people's capacity is maintained over time. And in the context of a deteriorating condition, that is an important finding. Even though, in a sense, there's no change is a very positive thing when the general background picture is one of progressive deterioration. It's very difficult to do this kind of research. It's expensive to do. You need to run trials over fairly long periods of time. And so still the evidence isn't as strong as I would like it to be.
Yes.
More research is needed.
Because in fact, I was going to ask a question about this. If there is clear evidence that there is a relationship between well-being and the arts, so why isn't it the case that it is more prominent in our agendas, you know? So you have observed this, even how it was implemented in the different strategies over time. So why does that happen? Is it because it is expensive, it takes time, or are there other factors affecting this?
Actually, one thing I'd like to say, which I think is important, is that evidence plays a very crucial role in terms of influencing policy and affecting change. But what I've also seen here in the UK is that people do learn from experience as well, and they do learn from seeing effective projects in action. And some years ago, I had discussions with the British Lung Foundation here about the idea that singing is beneficial for people with breathing difficulties. And going back several years, there was some skepticism, and people asked, well, what's the evidence for this? But actually, over time, the British Lung Foundation embraced this idea and actively promoted the development across the country of new singing groups for people with respiratory illness. And in a sense, they did that despite the fact that the research evidence is not especially strong. They were persuaded by direct accounts for people with breathing difficulties saying, you know, look, this really has helped me. It really ought to be promoted and made more widely available. And also, we can't underestimate the importance of health professionals and other professionals in local government and so on, actually seeing and experiencing the power of this kind of activity for themselves and hearing directly from people who benefit from this. Personal testimony, I think, is very, very powerful. And that has led to changes here. So now there are literally hundreds of Singing for Health groups all across the UK, running in a sustained way. Of course, COVID has really presented a huge challenge to all of this. And so we're in a very different time now. But up to that point, this is basically my experience here, that people learned from experience and were prepared to act on that basis.
Thank you very much, Professor Clift, for joining us today. Thank you. Now,
very welcome, thank you.
Emma, I wanted to ask you now about another aspect of well-being and how this impacts creativity. So you have, you explore the concept of creative meditation. So I'd really like to see what's that about, what it involves, and the relationship you've seen between the two.
So a lot of my work is, so a lot of people come to me and they tell me either that they're, you know, unhappy with an aspect of their lives, or their career is very unfulfilling. Or what I hear a lot is anxiety. I'm experiencing anxiety. And anxiety is, it's very similar to excitement when you look at it physiologically. It's just that the belief structure doesn't support the energy to come outwards, right? Anxiety, anxious energy is creative energy. It's just not supported to come outwards, right? But if you transform that into excitement, then the energy can come outwards. But how do you transform it, right? So you can transform it cognitively by looking at the belief structure, but also if you just go through the physiology, that's one of the quickest, most effective ways to work with people. So when you work with breath, for example, Professor Clift has just been speaking about singing and being with people. So one, when you're singing, you're really utilizing your breath and you are breathing down into your diaphragm. You're not taking shallow breaths.
Mm-hmm.
Anxiety, when you experience anxiety, you're taking shallow breaths, right? So when you're breathing down into your diaphragm, that's getting you more into rest and digest mode.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is the kind of conversation that I start becoming aware of how I am.
How you're breathing.
Sitting down, positioning myself, you know.
Exactly.
But, yeah, because you do it almost, you don't think about it. You're just sitting in ways, you're just breathing in ways, and then...
But it makes a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, like when we live in a very rushed culture. Yes, everything's in a hurry. And what happens is we end up being SNS dominant, so sympathetic nervous system dominant, so fight or flight, okay? And when you're in fight or flight, your fight or flight system is overactive. And when that's overactive, you're getting less oxygen and blood to your prefrontal cortex.
Mm-hmm.
The prefrontal cortex is here. It's your CEO of your brain. It literally switches off when you are in fight or flight. It becomes like practically, you know, dead.
Mm-hmm.
When you breathe deep and when you bring oxygen back to the prefrontal cortex and you remind your brain that everything's okay right now. If you look around you right now, okay, there's a pandemic going on, but if you just look around you right now, everything's okay. There can be bad stuff going on. You could be unwell. You could have whatever. But in this moment, everything's okay.
Mm-hmm.
When you step out of fight or flight, you turn your prefrontal cortex back on. And your prefrontal cortex is responsible for creativity, for compassion, for forward thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So it's absolutely vital. This is why I like to do meditations to help people to calm down their anxiety. Because when you calm down your anxiety, you step into a more creative space.
Okay.
And what comes out of you, the solutions that come out of you are just 10 times better than what would come out of you when you're in a rushed, anxious space.
Mm-hmm. So there seems to be almost a mutual relationship between the two, in that if you are in a good state, like if your well-being is there, then that affects creativity. And if you are engaging in a creative project, activity, whatever, that affects well-being, right?
Yes. There can be hindrances to you allowing yourself to be creative, right? If you're in a critic, if the voice inside your head typically tends to be like, you're such a loser, why did you say that? Don't say this, because you're going to sound stupid, blah, 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 blah. You're going to stop yourself, right? And then you're going to experience anxiety, because everyone has a story to tell. Mm-hmm. Everyone is here for some kind of reason. And so we all have this energy that's rising up and wants to come out, wants expression, okay? But when that voice inside your head is telling you, stay quiet, keep it in, shut up, you're going to experience this vibration of energy, because it can't be created or destroyed, right? It's just going to stay there, eating at you. That's anxiety. So when you experience anxiety, don't worry, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken, you know. What you need is support to understand it, so that then you can start putting yourself out there a bit more through creative endeavors, whatever that is for you, whether that starts with singing in the shower or writing in your journal. You know, it starts from wherever you're at right now. You know, some people are writing books, some people are creating music, some people are creating podcasts. Like, whatever it is for you right now, just start where you are. Make sense?
Okay. Yes, it does. I will need to think a little bit more about that in terms of like how it affects, you know, your me and the others, you know. But it's an interesting, it's interesting to think about it and to see how then it affects other aspects of your life. So actually, I wanted to ask this question to Marie, but in relation to artists now, because your study actually also suggests that being an artist leads to a higher life satisfaction. Isn't that right?
Yes, we actually we tested three things as well as we could with the data that we had. The first was, does attending artistic events of any sort improve or result or somehow if it is somehow correlated with higher life satisfaction? We found that it is, insofar as these big traditional events go. Does participation in the arts translate to higher life satisfaction? It does, even more broadly than traditional events. So people who actively do anything, and frankly, it doesn't matter what the quality is, because the key thing is the participation. Of course, quality may matter for other end games, like, Malta's performance on the international stage and so forth. But insofar as yielding well-being, quality does not seem to be the issue. And the third question we ask is, are artists themselves, as a cluster of people, leading more satisfied lives than others? And we did find, even with a simple comparison of means, 20% of the respondents in this survey of over 1,000 people, and it was a representative survey conducted by the National Statistics Office, self-assess themselves as being an artist. They also self-assess themselves as having relatively higher life satisfaction than anybody else. When you start to break it down, what is it? Are they healthier? Do they participate more? Of course they do, they're artists. Do they engage more even as audience? Yes, they do. But they also have other lifestyle aspects which compound to yield a higher life satisfaction. And the kind of lifestyle choices are those that we've been probably talking about. The engagement, the ability to step away from just one source of satisfaction, for example, income, to have a more diversified wheel of life, to use words which we discussed earlier, and so forth. One thing I want to say, if I may, because I thought you asked a very interesting question earlier, and that is, if it's so obvious, if it's so important, why aren't we doing more of it, right? What if everybody knows that somehow, at least for psychological well-being, engagement in the arts is so important, then why aren't we doing more of it? So there's two answers to this. The first is, we're actually doing quite a bit. There's a lot going on, even if it's not formal, so people do engage in their homes. They may not self-assess as artists, they may not consider what they're doing as arts, but there is quite a lot going on. And in recent years, I think in Malta, we saw quite a boost in the sector between policy and institutions and grants and events. I think there's quite a lot going on. And the second answer is, there's actually quite a few other determinants of well-being which we kind of ignore and only tend to focus on the material well-being. So there's a lot of emphasis in policy, especially on GDP, income, employment, growth, and so forth. By all means, I'm an economist and I do believe that these are fundamental. And if they're missing, if you're unemployed, almost everything else goes downhill, right? However, beyond a certain level of material well-being, all these other determinants, be they engagement in the art, engagement in sport, a healthy life, socializing, having a good community around you, all of these other things, which are fundamental to well-being, kind of take a second seat to material well-being. And so I would argue that we should broaden your question, Elaine, and that is, if we know that well-being is beyond income and material wealth, why is still so much importance given to economic growth?
Thank you, Marie. And I think in your paper, in your latest study, you do point out these various factors. So as you said, you go beyond what we usually perceive as well-being and point out all this. And in fact, I would like to now launch a video, a short animation video, which you have shared with us, just to highlight these other points and the findings from this paper. So thank you, Marie, for sharing that with us. I mean, obviously, it just goes to show that this topic is quite vast and we need to discuss more. We need to explore further the subject. And on that, I would like to ask Marianne, in fact, what are the next steps in relation to this particular subject now that you're working on the strategy? This is going to be part of it. So what's next?
Yes, in fact, obviously this discussion consolidated my idea, the team's idea, Arts Council's idea, that this is a very important theme we need to be tackling, the well-being. With little reference to what Dr. Marie actually mentioned, maybe a lot of importance is being given to the actual materialistic elements. Possibly we needed that because when you figure out that when the artistic and cultural sector, the GDP has risen to 7%, it's thanks to that focus and that intensity. Now that that is established, maybe we need to look around us a bit and, housekeep this element of well-being. And in fact, yes, that is why the national cultural policy and the strategy, which are going to be in line with each other, are looking very seriously and with priority at this aspect. In fact, as part of our team, I can't miss mentioning that Dr. Simone Nguanes is actually focusing on this aspect when it comes to diversity, communities, and well-being. And also true, I have to mention once again, the cultural rights, because one at first glance might say, how does this connect with well-being? But yes, at the end of the day, the cultural rights are there to lead to the well-being of society at large. We can't, of course, in any way minimize the importance of the specialized arts and well-being, the therapeutic element, this specialization when it comes to arts therapies, that is of crucial importance. And we believe that much more investment needs to take place. So yes, as Arts Council, we're very much looking for more investment and more focus to take place. And when I say investment, it does not consist solely of financial investment, but also when it comes to capacity building and resources overall. So yes, I believe that now Malta has arrived at a position where we need to take this seriously, and the initial steps are being taken, and that is the way forward.
Thank you, Marianne. And on that note, it is time to conclude this first session. I would like to thank Arts Council Malta, Marianne Kauki, and all the team for hosting the ACM Hangouts. Thank you to our guests for being with us today and contributing to this conversation. Feel free to leave us a message on our Facebook page if you have any comments and if you would like to discuss further. See you next month for another session of the ACM Hangouts, focusing this time round on creative entrepreneurship. Take care and stay safe.